The blood-red dawn broke over the rolling plains as Eliza Zimmerman stood on her porch, clutching a crumpled letter that would shatter her world forever. It was 1875 in Wheatland, Wyoming Territory, and the morning stillness belied the storm raging within her heart as she read the words penned by her husband, confessing what he had done with their precious children. Eliza's hands trembled, the paper crinkling beneath her white-knuckled grip. 3 days prior, her husband, Frank, had disappeared with their 2 children, 8-year-old Samuel and 6-year-old Rebecca, claiming they were going to visit his cousin in Cheyenne. The letter, delivered by a traveling merchant, revealed the horrifying truth. Frank had sold their children to a wealthy rancher named Hargrove to settle gambling debts that had mounted over the past year. "Forgive me," he had written. "I had no choice. Hargrove would have killed me. They'll have a better life than I could give them. Don't come looking by the time you read this. I'll be headed to California." Eliza collapsed onto the porch steps, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as the reality of her situation sank in. Frank had gambled away everything, their savings, their livestock, their future, and now their children. She'd known about his gambling, had begged him to stop, but never imagined he would sink this low. The ranch was nearly barren now. Just a few chickens and their old mare, Penny, remained. The cattle had disappeared months ago, sold off piece by piece to cover Frank's mounting debts. Eliza's sobs echoed across the empty farmyard as she clutched the letter to her chest. Her mind raced. She had to find them, had to get her children back. But how? She had no money, no horse suitable for the journey, and no idea where this Hargrove ranch might be, except that it was somewhere near the Montana border. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her from her despair. Hastily wiping her tears, Eliza rose to see a lone rider approaching her property. The morning sun glinted off his dust-covered form as he guided his chestnut stallion toward the house. Matthew Hayes pulled his horse to a stop and removed his hat, revealing a weathered face and kind eyes that had seen their share of hardship on the frontier. He was the new ranch hand at the neighboring Carson property, having arrived in Wheatland just 2 months prior. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "I came to speak with Frank about that fence line," but his words trailed off as he noticed her tear-stained face and the letter clutched in her hand. "He's gone," Eliza said, her voice hollow. "Frank's gone, and he's taken my children." Matthew dismounted, approaching cautiously. "Taken them where, madam?" The dam broke, and words poured from Eliza's lips, the gambling, the mounting debts, the final betrayal. "He sold them, Mr. Hayes. He sold our children to some rancher named Hargrove to pay off his gambling debts." Matthew's face darkened with each word. "Hargrove? Silas Hargrove? You know of him?" Hope flickered in Eliza's chest. "I know enough," Matthew replied grimly. "His ranch is 4 days' ride from here, just south of the Montana line." "He's not known for his kindness, Mrs. Zimmerman." Eliza's knees nearly buckled. "I have to get to them. I have to bring them home." Matthew looked at the run-down ranch, then back at the desperate mother before him. He had come to Wyoming to escape his own troubled past, to start fresh where no one knew his name or the ghosts that haunted him. Getting involved in someone else's troubles was the last thing he needed. But the thought of those children in Hargrove's possession. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Matthew said, settling his hat back on his head, "I'll bring your children home." "Why would you help us?" Eliza asked, suspicion mingling with desperate hope. "You barely know me." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Because no child deserves to be sold like cattle, and no mother deserves to have her children taken. I know Hargrove's type. I've dealt with men like him before." "I'm coming with you," Eliza declared, straightening her shoulders. "It's dangerous country, madam. Bandits, rough terrain." "They are my children, Mr. Hayes," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "I won't sit here waiting while a stranger determines their fate, even a well-meaning one." Matthew studied her for a long moment. Her dress was worn, her hands calloused from hard work, but there was steel in her gaze that told him arguing would be pointless. "We'll need supplies," he finally conceded, "and you'll need a better horse than that old mare." "I have very little money," Eliza admitted. "I've got savings," Matthew replied. "We can settle accounts after we bring your children home." Within 2 hours, they had gathered what they needed. Eliza packed clothing, food, and her late father's revolver, a weapon she hoped she wouldn't need to use but was determined to carry. She changed into her only pair of riding pants, hidden away because Frank hated them, and a sturdy shirt. Her golden brown hair was tied back tightly, and she donned a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. Matthew returned with a sturdy paint mare he'd purchased from the livery stable. "She's not young, but she's sure-footed and has plenty of stamina," he explained, helping Eliza secure her packs. As they prepared to depart, Eliza took one last look at the farmhouse. For 10 years it had been her home, the place where she'd borne her children, where she'd laughed and loved and cried. Now it stood as a monument to betrayal. "We'll be back," Matthew assured her, misinterpreting her gaze. "Your home will still be here." Eliza turned to him, her eyes clear. "My home is wherever my children are, Mr. Hayes. Right now, that's north with this Hargrove." They set out as the sun reached its zenith, heading north along the winding trail that would eventually lead them to the Montana border. Matthew rode slightly ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, alert for danger. Eliza followed, her back straight despite the ache already forming from the unaccustomed riding. "How do you know Hargrove?" Eliza asked as they rode. Matthew's shoulders stiffened slightly. "I worked cattle drives that crossed his land. His reputation spreads far in these parts." "What kind of man buys children?" The question came out as a whisper, almost to herself. "The kind who sees people as property," Matthew answered anyway, his voice hard. "Hargrove runs one of the biggest spreads in the territory. He doesn't distinguish between cattle, horses, or people to him. They're all assets to be acquired and used." "And what kind of man are you, Mr. Hayes?" Eliza asked, studying his profile. "Why would you risk your life for a woman and children you barely know?" Matthew was silent for so long that Eliza thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "I was once a boy sold to pay a debt. Different circumstances, but the same result. No one came for me." The simple statement hung in the air between them, and Eliza felt a new understanding of the quiet cowboy riding beside her. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be," he replied. "It made me who I am. And it's why I know we're going to get your children back, Mrs. Zimmerman. No matter what it takes." They rode until dusk began to settle across the plains, making camp in a small grove of cottonwoods alongside a shallow creek. Matthew efficiently built a small fire, while Eliza prepared a simple meal from their provisions. "We should reach Clarion by tomorrow evening," Matthew said as they ate. "It's a small town, but we can resupply there. From Clarion, it's another 3 days to Hargrove's ranch." Eliza nodded, staring into the flames. "Do you think they're scared?" she asked suddenly, her voice catching. Matthew set down his tin plate. "They have each other," he said gently, "and they have a mother who's coming for them. That's more than most in their situation." "Samuel has nightmares," Eliza continued, as if she hadn't heard him. "He wakes up crying sometimes. And Rebecca, she's afraid of the dark. Who will comfort them? Who will hold them when they cry for me?" Her voice broke on the final word. Matthew moved to sit beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Children are resilient, Mrs. Zimmerman, more than we give them credit for. Hold on to that." Eliza wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Call me Eliza, please. If we're to ride together for days, Mrs. Zimmerman seems overly formal." "Eliza," Matthew said, testing the name. "Then you must call me Matthew." She nodded, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Matthew, thank you for doing this." "Get some rest," he replied. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Eliza lay awake for hours that night, staring at the stars through the cottonwood branches, her mind filled with images of her children. Were they together? Were they being treated well? Did they understand what had happened, or did they think she had abandoned them? The questions tortured her until exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. Morning came all too quickly, the pale light filtering through the trees as Matthew gently roused her. "We should get moving," he said, already having packed most of their camp. "The earlier we start, the more ground we cover." They rode hard that day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a quick meal. Eliza's muscles screamed in protest, unaccustomed to such prolonged riding, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. Every mile brought her closer to her children. "Tell me about them," Matthew said as they rode side by side across an open stretch of prairie. "Your children." A ghost of a smile touched Eliza's lips. "Samuel is my serious one, always thinking, always watching. He likes to figure out how things work, takes apart anything he can get his hands on. Rebecca is his opposite. She's all laughter and sunshine, never still for a moment. She sings constantly, little songs she makes up as she goes." "They sound wonderful," Matthew said. "They are," Eliza replied, her voice firm, "and they deserve better than what their father did to them." "How did you meet Frank?" Matthew asked cautiously. Eliza's expression hardened slightly. "I was 17, working in my father's general store in Missouri. Frank came through town, charming and full of dreams about the West. He promised me adventure, a life beyond that small town." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose I got my adventure after all." "Not all adventures end badly," Matthew offered. "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I've learned to be wary of dreams and the men who peddle them." They reached Clarion as the sun was setting, the small town consisting of little more than a main street with a general store, saloon, and livery stable. A few houses were scattered around the edges, with the occasional lamplight glowing in windows. "We'll get rooms at the boarding house," Matthew decided, nodding toward a 2-story building at the end of the street. "Rest properly, resupply in the morning, and be on our way by midday." The boarding house was run by a plump, motherly woman named Mrs. Peterson, who fussed over Eliza's tired appearance and insisted on providing hot water for washing before serving them a hearty stew. "What brings you folks to Clarion?" she asked as they ate in the small dining room. "Not many pass through here unless they're headed to the mining camps further north," Matthew answered before Eliza could. "Family business? My sister and I are visiting relatives near the Montana border." Mrs. Peterson nodded, though her eyes showed a hint of suspicion at their dusty, travel-worn appearance. "Well, you're welcome here. Rooms are clean, and breakfast is at 7 sharp." After dinner, Eliza retreated to her small but clean room, grateful for the real bed and privacy. She washed as best she could with the basin of water Mrs. Peterson had provided, then sat on the edge of the bed brushing out her long hair. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Eliza." Matthew's voice was low. She opened the door a crack to find him standing in the hallway, his expression serious. "What is it?" "I was asking around while you were getting settled," he said quietly. "Hargrove passed through here 3 days ago with 2 children matching Samuel and Rebecca's descriptions." Eliza's heart leaped. "They're alive? They're all right?" "They seemed unharmed," Matthew confirmed. "The stable boy said the little girl was crying, but the boy was trying to comfort her. They headed north toward Hargrove's ranch." Tears of relief mingled with renewed determination. "We'll find them," she whispered fiercely. "We will," Matthew agreed. "But there's something else. Hargrove wasn't alone. He had 3 men with him, all armed. Getting your children back won't be as simple as asking politely." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "I never expected it would be. Whatever it takes, Matthew." "I mean that." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we ride at first light." True to his word, Matthew was waiting with the horses as dawn broke over Clarion. They had restocked their supplies at the general store when it opened, and by the time the sun was fully above the horizon, they were already miles north of town. The terrain began to change as they rode, the open prairie giving way to more rugged country with rocky outcroppings and stands of pine. The trail narrowed, sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing Matthew to rely on his knowledge of the land to keep them on course. "Have you ever killed a man?" Eliza asked suddenly, as they navigated a particularly narrow passage between 2 rocky hills. Matthew glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Was it difficult? Taking a life should never be easy, he replied after a moment, but sometimes it's necessary. Eliza nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to the revolver at her hip. If Hargrove or his men try to stop me from taking my children, I won't hesitate. I believe you, Matthew said simply. That night they camped in a small clearing surrounded by pines. The air was cooler here, and Eliza was grateful for the extra blanket Matthew had insisted on purchasing in Clarion. They sat closer to the fire than they had the previous night, eating dried beef and beans warmed in a small pot. We should reach Devil's Pass by tomorrow evening, Matthew said, studying a crude map he'd drawn in the dirt. It's the last settlement before Hargrove's land begins. After that, we're in his territory. What should we expect? Hargrove's ranch is massive, thousands of acres with the main house built like a fortress on a hill. He'll have men patrolling the boundaries, especially near the house. Getting in won't be easy. But not impossible, Eliza pressed. Matthew's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. No, not impossible. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Tell me. Hargrove hosts a poker game every month for the wealthy ranchers and businessmen in the area. According to what I heard in Clarion, the next one is in 3 days, perfect timing for our arrival. And, Eliza prompted when he hesitated, and I propose we use it as cover to get onto the property. I can pose as a gambler looking to join the game, and you, he paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to suggest. Eliza's eyes narrowed. I can pose as what exactly? As my companion, the type of woman who might accompany a gambler. Eliza's cheeks flushed with indignation. You want me to pretend to be It would give you freedom to move about while attention is focused on the game, Matthew interrupted hurriedly. No one questions where such women wander in a house like that. Eliza was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. The idea was degrading, offensive, and possibly their best chance. Would it work? She finally asked. I believe so. It gets us both inside without raising suspicion. And once we're in, we find your children and we leave as quietly or as loudly as necessary. Eliza nodded slowly. Very well. I'll do whatever it takes. The conversation lulled after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned down to embers. Eliza wrapped herself in her blanket, but sleep eluded her as she contemplated the days ahead and what she might be forced to do. Matthew? She called softly, unsure if he was still awake. Yes? His response came immediately from the other side of the dying fire. What if we fail? What if we can't get them back? There was a rustle as Matthew sat up, his face barely visible in the dim light. We won't fail, Eliza. I promise you that. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen the look in your eyes when you speak of your children. It's the same look my mother had when she tried to stop them from taking me. His voice had dropped, becoming rough with memory. She failed because she was alone. You're not alone. The simple declaration settled over Eliza like a warm cloak, offering more comfort than she had expected. Thank you, she whispered, and this time when she closed her eyes, sleep came more easily. The next day brought them through increasingly rugged country, the trail winding through pine forests and across rapid streams. By midday, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and the first spatters of rain began to fall. There's a line shack about an hour ahead, Matthew called over his shoulder as the rain intensified. We can wait out the worst of it there. By the time they reached the crude cabin, they were both soaked to the skin. The shack was little more than a single room with a stone fireplace, abandoned during the warmer months but maintained as shelter for cowboys working the range. Matthew quickly got a fire going while Eliza hung their wet coats near the flames, the small space filled with warmth and the hissing of steam as their clothing began to dry. The storm looks to be settling in, Matthew observed, peering through the single grimy window. We might have to stay the night. Eliza nodded, wringing water from her hair. Will this delay us too much? We should still reach Devil's Pass by midday tomorrow, which gives us plenty of time to prepare before Hargrove's poker game. They settled in, making the best of their forced pause. Matthew produced a deck of cards from his saddlebag. and they played a few hands to pass the time, the tension of their mission momentarily eased by the simple distraction. "You're quite good," Eliza remarked after he won his third consecutive hand. A shadow crossed Matthew's face. "My father taught me. It was one of his many vices." "Is that why you recognized Frank's behavior? You saw it in your father?" Matthew nodded, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. "My father was a dreamer too, always chasing the next big win, the next opportunity. He lost our farm in Missouri to gambling debts when I was 12. When that wasn't enough to cover what he owed, he offered me his payment to work off his debt on a riverboat." Eliza's hand covered her mouth. "That's horrible." "It was a different kind of horrible than what your children are facing," Matthew said, dealing another hand. "But yes, it taught me early on what some men are capable of." "How did you escape?" "I jumped ship near St. Louis when I was 16, made my way west, worked cattle drives, took whatever jobs I could find. Eventually ended up in Wyoming." "And now you're risking everything to help a woman and children you barely know," Eliza said softly. Matthew looked up, meeting her eyes. "Perhaps I'm helping the woman and children I wish someone had helped all those years ago." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared pain and determination. Eliza reached across the small table, covering his hand with hers. "Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful." The moment stretched, intimate in the small cabin with rain drumming on the roof and fire crackling in the hearth. Then Matthew gently withdrew his hand, clearing his throat. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fireplace, the small cabin leaving little room for privacy. Eliza lay awake for some time, listening to the rain and watching the firelight play across Matthew's face as he slept. There was a gentleness there that belied his hard exterior, and she found herself wondering what kind of life he might have had if his father hadn't sold him to cover a debt. The same question echoed in her mind about her own children. What kind of life awaited them if she couldn't bring them home? The thought steeled her resolve anew, and when she finally drifted to sleep, it was with renewed determination. Morning brought clearing skies and muddy trails, but they set out early, pushing their horses as much as the conditions would allow. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise to see Devil's Pass spread out below them, a collection of rough buildings nestled in a narrow valley. "It's not much," Matthew said as they picked their way down the slope, "but it's the last taste of civilization before Hargrove's territory." The town consisted of a general store that doubled as a post office, a saloon with rooms for rent above it, a blacksmith shop, and a handful of cabins scattered among the pines. A muddy main street ran through the center, already churned to a thick soup by horses and wagons. They made their way to the saloon, where Matthew secured a room for Eliza while he claimed he would sleep in the stable with the horses. "It's better this way," he explained when she protested. "I need to listen for information, and men talk more freely in stables than they do in proper establishments." Eliza reluctantly agreed, taking the key to her small room. "What's our next move?" "Rest today. Tomorrow we prepare for our rolls. Hargrove's ranch is half a day's ride north of here. We'll leave just after dawn the day after tomorrow." "So soon," Eliza murmured, both relieved and terrified that the moment of confrontation was drawing near. "One more thing," Matthew added, his voice dropping. "From now on, in public, we need to act like what we're pretending to be, a gambler and his companion. It will make our arrival at Hargrove's less suspicious if people here have already seen us together." Eliza's cheeks colored, but she nodded. "I understand." That evening, they dined in the saloon's small eating area, Matthew playing the part of the confident gambler with Eliza at his side. He kept his hand at the small of her back, leaned in close to whisper in her ear, and made sure everyone saw him purchase the finest whiskey available. It was strange and uncomfortable for Eliza to be looked at the way the men in the saloon eyed her with appraisal and assumption. But she forced herself to smile, to laugh at Matthew's comments, to play the role they had agreed upon. "You're doing well," Matthew murmured as they made their way back to her room later that evening. I've already heard whispers about the gambler and his pretty lady heading to Hargrove's game. Good, Eliza replied, though her smile felt strained. The sooner we establish our cover, the sooner we can get to my children. At her door, Matthew hesitated. I'll need to purchase appropriate clothing for both of us tomorrow. For you, something noticeable. Eliza swallowed hard, but nodded. Whatever is necessary. Try to rest, Matthew advised. I'll see you in the morning. The next day passed in a flurry of preparations. Matthew returned mid-morning with packages new clothes for both of them, purchased from the general store's limited selection, and a traveling peddler who happened to be passing through. For himself, he had acquired a fine black coat, a silk waistcoat, and a new hat. For Eliza, he had chosen a dress that made her eyes widen deep red, low cut with black lace trim. It's the only thing suitable for the role, he explained apologetically. The peddler had it in his wagon. Apparently it was commissioned by one of the women at Miss Lucille's establishment in Cheyenne, but never claimed. Eliza fingered the fabric, so different from her practical cotton dresses. It will serve its purpose, she said finally. They spent the remainder of the day refining their plan. Matthew had gathered information about Hargrove's ranch layout from men in the saloon and stable, sketching a rough map for Eliza. The main house is here, he indicated, with guest quarters on the east wing. The children would likely be kept somewhere in the west wing, possibly in the upper rooms. How do we find them once we're inside? I'll join the poker game to establish our presence. You'll need to slip away claiming a headache or some other excuse that won't raise suspicion. Then, you search the west wing while I keep Hargrove occupied. And if I find them? We meet back at the stables, Matthew said, pointing to a spot on his crude map. I'll have our horses ready. Once you have the children, get to the stables as quickly and quietly as you can. If all goes well, we'll be miles away before they realize the children are missing. And if all doesn't go well? Eliza asked softly. Matthew's eyes hardened. Then we fight our way out. That night, Eliza barely slept, her mind racing with all that could go wrong. Would her children recognize her after nearly a week apart? Would they come willingly, or had Hargrove somehow poisoned their minds against her? And what of Matthew? What would happen to him if things went badly? The thought of the quiet cowboy coming to harm because of her twisted her stomach into knots. In less than a week, he had become more than a stranger, more than an ally. His determination to help her, his gentle strength, his unwavering support, all had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. Dawn came all too soon, pale light filtering through the rough curtains of her room. Eliza dressed carefully in her traveling clothes, packing the red dress in her saddlebag for when they neared Hargrove's ranch. After a quick breakfast with Matthew in the saloon, they set out, riding north under a clear blue sky. We should reach Hargrove's property by mid-afternoon, Matthew said as they rode side by side. There's a stand of trees about a mile from the main house where we can change and prepare. Eliza nodded, her throat too tight for words. Today she would see her children, or die trying. The terrain grew more rugged as they rode, the trail winding through pine-covered hills. Occasionally, they passed boundary markers for Hargrove's ranch, branded wood posts driven into the ground at intervals. His property starts here, Matthew explained when they passed the first marker. From now on, we're on his land. They rode in watchful silence for several more hours before Matthew led them off the trail into a dense stand of pines. This is where we prepare, he said, dismounting. We should be safe from prying eyes here. Eliza slipped behind a cluster of trees to change, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar fastenings of the red dress. It fit well enough, though it was more revealing than anything she'd worn before, the neckline dipping low and the fabric clinging to her figure. When she emerged, Matthew was already changed into his gambler's attire, looking remarkably different from the dusty cowboy who had ridden to her aid days before. He froze when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly before he quickly averted his gaze. Will I pass inspection? Eliza asked, attempting a light tone despite her discomfort. Matthew cleared his throat. Yes, you'll You'll certainly attract the right kind of attention." They repacked their regular clothing and mounted their horses once more. As they rode, Matthew gave her final instructions. "Let me do the talking when we arrive. You're there as decoration, nothing more. Women like the one you're pretending to be are seen, not heard." "I understand," Eliza replied, adjusting her posture to match the character she was playing. "Once we're inside, watch the servants, they'll know where everything is. The children are most likely kept away from the main areas. Listen for any mention of them." The trees thinned, and suddenly they were riding across an open meadow toward a sprawling ranch house set on a low hill. The main building was an imposing structure of timber and stone, with wings extending to either side and a broad veranda wrapping around the front. "Impressive, isn't it?" Matthew remarked, "built with blood money and the broken backs of men who crossed him." They approached the front of the property, where several other riders and carriages were already gathered. Men in expensive clothing were being greeted by servants, while women in fine dresses clung to their arms. A stable boy ran forward to take their horses as they dismounted at the bottom of the broad steps leading to the main entrance. Matthew helped Eliza down, his hand lingering at her waist in a possessive gesture that was part of their charade. "Remember," he whispered, his lips close to her ear, "you're mine for all appearances. Stay close until we're safely inside." Eliza nodded, slipping her arm through his as they ascended the steps. At the top, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and cold eyes greeted them. "Welcome to Rocking H Ranch," he said, his gaze assessing them openly. "I don't believe we've met." "Matthew Hayes," Matthew replied smoothly, extending his hand. "I heard about your game from Thompson in Devil's Pass. Said you might welcome fresh blood at your table." The man, who could only be Silas Hargrove himself, shook Matthew's hand with a firm grip. "Indeed, fresh blood is always welcome, especially when it comes with such charming companionship." His eyes lingered on Eliza in a way that made her skin crawl. "Elizabeth," Matthew said, using the false name they had agreed upon. "A recent acquisition from St. Louis." "Enchanted," Hargrove said, taking Eliza's hand and brushing his lips across her knuckles. "Any friend of Thompson's is welcome here. Please, enter and enjoy my hospitality." They followed Hargrove into a grand entrance hall, where servants moved efficiently among the guests, offering drinks and taking coats. The wealth on display was staggering. Fine artwork adorned the walls, crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, and expensive rugs covered the polished wood floors. "The game begins in an hour," Hargrove informed Matthew. "Until then, please enjoy refreshments in the parlor. Elizabeth, you'll find other ladies in the sitting room to the left, though you're welcome to stay with your patron, if you prefer." "She'll stay with me," Matthew said firmly. "Elizabeth gets nervous in new surroundings." Hargrove's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "As you wish. Jenkins will show you to the parlor." A butler appeared at their side, guiding them through the house to a large room where several men were already gathered, drinking and smoking. Matthew led Eliza to a relatively quiet corner, accepting 2 glasses of whiskey from a passing servant. "He's exactly as I remembered," Matthew murmured, his lips close to her ear as if whispering sweet nothings rather than strategy. "Arrogant, calculating." "Do you think he recognized you?" Eliza whispered back. "No, I was just another cowboy on a cattle drive that crossed his land years ago. Nothing memorable." Eliza sipped her whiskey, using the glass to hide her expression as she scanned the room. "How do I find the children?" "Wait until the game begins. Everyone will be focused on the cards. That's when you make your excuse and slip away." The hour passed with excruciating slowness, Matthew playing his role perfectly, the confident gambler showing off his beautiful companion. Eliza smiled and laughed in all the right places, though her heart raced with anxiety and her eyes constantly darted toward the doorways, hoping for a glimpse of her children. Finally, a gong sounded, and Hargrove appeared at the parlor entrance. "Gentlemen, the game awaits in the card room. Ladies, you may join us or retire to the sitting room as you prefer." The men rose, some kissing their companions before following Hargrove. Matthew squeezed Eliza's hand. "Wait 15 minutes, then claim a headache." Ask a servant for somewhere quiet to lie down. Eliza nodded almost imperceptibly. Be careful, she whispered. Find the children, he replied, his voice equally low. I'll take care of the rest. Matthew followed the other men out of the parlor, leaving Eliza alone with a few other women who were clearly in roles similar to her own. They chatted amongst themselves, ignoring her, which suited Eliza perfectly. She counted the minutes, watching the ornate clock on the mantel until 15 had passed. Then she rose, pressing a hand to her temple with a soft moan that drew the attention of a nearby servant. Miss, are you unwell? The young maid asked, approaching with concern. A dreadful headache, Eliza replied, affecting a pained expression. Is there somewhere quiet I might lie down for a while? Of course, miss. I can show you to a guest room in the east wing. Thank you, but I wouldn't want to trouble you, Eliza said quickly. Perhaps you could just point the way? And my companion mentioned children staying here. I have a small gift for them. I love bringing joy to little ones. She produced a small paper package from her reticule, a ribbon she had purchased in Devil's Pass for this very purpose. The maid hesitated, glancing around nervously. The new children are in the west wing, miss, but Mr. Hargrove doesn't allow visitors. They're being trained. Eliza's heart clenched at the words. Trained? For what purpose? Household service, miss. The boy for stable work eventually, the girl for kitchen duties. But please don't mention I told you Mr. Hargrove is very particular about his household arrangements. Of course not, Eliza assured her, fighting to keep her voice steady. Now, about that quiet room? The maid gave her directions to a guest room in the east wing, and Eliza thanked her before setting off in that direction. As soon as the maid was out of sight, however, she changed course, making her way toward the west wing as casually as she could manage. The house was massive, with long corridors and numerous doors. Eliza moved quietly, her senses alert for any sound that might indicate her children's presence. She passed several room storage areas, servants' quarters, a small study before pausing at the foot of a narrow staircase that led to the upper floor of the west wing. Gathering her courage, she ascended the stairs, wincing at each creak of the wood beneath her feet. At the top, a long hallway stretched before her, lined with doors. She listened at each one, hearing nothing until she reached the third door on the left. From within came a sound that made her heart stop a child's soft sobbing, punctuated by a young boy's voice offering comfort. Don't cry, Becca. Mama will find us. I promise she will. Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob of her own. Samuel and Rebecca, they were alive. They were together, and Samuel still believed in her. With trembling fingers, she tried the door handle, only to find it locked. She glanced around frantically, searching for something to pick the lock with. Finding nothing suitable, she knelt before the door. Samuel, she called softly through the keyhole. Samuel, it's Mama. There was a sudden silence within, then a scrambling sound as someone ran to the door. Mama? Samuel's voice was incredulous, hopeful. Mama, is it really you? Yes, my love, it's me, Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. I've come to take you home. Is Rebecca with you? Are you both all right? We're here, Mama. Rebecca's voice joined in, high and excited. The door's locked. The mean man put us in here. Listen carefully, Eliza said, struggling to keep her voice calm and quiet. I'm going to get you out, but I need to find a key or something to open this door. I need you both to be very quiet and wait just a little longer. Can you do that for me? Yes, Mama, Samuel replied, his voice suddenly serious beyond his 8 years. We'll be quiet. But hurry, the man said he's sending us away tomorrow, to different places. Eliza's blood ran cold. I'll be back as quickly as I can, I promise. She rose, mind racing. She needed to find a key or something to break the lock. She hurried back down the hallway, trying doors as she went. Most were locked, but one opened into what appeared to be a housekeeper's room, with linens and cleaning supplies neatly arranged on shelves. Searching quickly, Eliza found a ring of keys hanging on a small hook behind the door. She grabbed them and hurried back to her children's room, praying that one would fit the lock. The third key she tried, turned with a soft click, and the door swung open to reveal her children, wide-eyed and tearful. For a moment they stared at each other in disbelief, Then Rebecca launched herself into Eliza's arms with a cry. "Mama, you came! You found us!" Eliza clutched her daughter tightly, reaching out with one arm to pull Samuel into the embrace as well. "My darlings, my precious ones," she whispered fiercely. "Of course I came. I will always come for you." Samuel pulled back first, his young face serious. "Where's Papa? Did he tell you what happened?" Eliza's heart ached at the question. How could she explain their father's betrayal? "We'll talk about Papa later," she said gently. "Right now we need to leave this place. There's a kind man helping us. His name is Matthew. He's going to take us home." "The man said we belong to him now," Rebecca said, her lower lip trembling. "He said you gave us away." "Never," Eliza said firmly, cupping her daughter's face. "I would never give you away. That man lied to you. You are my children, and you're coming home with me." Samuel nodded, his faith in his mother unshaken. "I told Becca you'd come. I knew you would." "We need to be very quiet now," Eliza instructed, checking the hallway before guiding her children out of the room. "We're going to the stables, where Matthew is waiting for us. Hold my hands and don't make a sound." They crept down the stairs, Eliza's heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give them away. The house seemed eerily quiet, with most of the activity centered around the card room where the game was in progress. They had almost reached a side door that would lead them outside when a voice froze them in their tracks. "Well now, what have we here?" Eliza whirled to see a burly man in Hargrove's employ blocking their path, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "These children belong to Mr. Hargrove," he said, his eyes narrowing as he took in Eliza's appearance and the children clinging to her hands. "And you're certainly not where a gaming companion should be." Eliza pushed the children behind her, standing tall despite her racing heart. "These are my children. This man Hargrove bought them from their father without my knowledge or consent. I'm taking them home." The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the narrow hallway. "That's not how it works, lady. Mr. Hargrove paid good money for these two. They're his property now." "Children are not property," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady given the fear coursing through her. "Now step aside." "I don't think so," the man replied, drawing his pistol. "Mr. Hargrove will want to speak with you. And your fancy man, too, I expect. Trying to cheat the boss is a dangerous game." Before Eliza could respond, a familiar voice spoke from behind the guard. "I couldn't agree more." The guard turned, only to meet Matthew's fist with a sickening crunch. The man staggered, his pistol firing into the ceiling as he fell. Matthew kicked the weapon away, then delivered another blow that left the guard unconscious on the floor. "Matthew!" Eliza cried, relief washing over her. "We need to move," he said urgently, eyeing the children with a quick, reassuring smile. "That shot will bring others. The stables are just outside. I've got horses ready." They rushed through the side door and into the gathering dusk. The stables were 100 yards away across an open yard too exposed for Eliza's comfort, but they had no choice. "Run," Matthew urged, taking Rebecca into his arms to speed their flight. They were halfway to the stables when shouts erupted from the house behind them. Eliza glanced back to see several men emerging from the main entrance, Hargrove among them. "Stop them!" Hargrove's voice carried across the yard. "They're stealing my property." Matthew thrust Rebecca into Eliza's arms as they reached the stable doors. "Get them on the horses. I'll hold them off." Inside, 3 horses were saddled and waiting. Eliza lifted Rebecca onto one, then helped Samuel mount behind his sister. "Hold tight to each other," she instructed, gathering the reins of the 3rd horse for Matthew. The sound of gunfire sent her ducking instinctively. Matthew appeared in the doorway, pistol in hand. "They're coming. We need to ride now." Eliza mounted her horse, keeping a tight grip on the reins of the children's mount. Matthew swung into his saddle, fired once more toward the approaching men, then kicked his horse into motion. "This way," he shouted, leading them toward a back entrance to the stables that opened onto a trail heading away from the main house. They galloped into the gathering darkness, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them as they entered the thick forest that bordered Hargrove's property. Matthew set a punishing pace, clearly familiar with the terrain despite the fading light. Only when they had ridden for nearly an hour and the sounds of pursuit had long since disappeared did Matthew finally slow their pace to a walk. "We need to rest the horses," he explained, leading them into a small clearing beside a stream. "And your children look about ready to fall from the saddle." It was true, Rebecca was nearly asleep in Samuel's arms, and even Samuel's small face was drawn with exhaustion. Eliza dismounted quickly, lifting Rebecca down while Matthew helped Samuel. "Are we safe?" Eliza asked as she cradled her sleeping daughter. Matthew checked his pistol, counting the remaining bullets. "For now. Hargrove won't give up easily. Children are valuable on the frontier, especially ones old enough to work but young enough to train. But we've got a good lead, and I know these mountains better than his men." Samuel stood close to his mother, his eyes wide as he looked up at Matthew. "Are you the kind man Mama told us about? The one helping us get home?" Matthew knelt to be at eye level with the boy. "That's right. My name is Matthew Hayes. Your mother is a very brave woman, you know. She rode for days to find you." Samuel nodded solemnly. "I knew she would come. I told Becca she would." "Smart boy," Matthew said with a small smile. "Now, how about we get some rest? We've got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." They made a simple camp, Matthew insisting they risk no fire that might be spotted by pursuers. Eliza settled the children on her bedroll, wrapping them in her blanket. They fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by their ordeal. Eliza moved to sit beside Matthew, who kept watch at the edge of the clearing. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I can never repay what you've done for us." Matthew shook his head. "Seeing those children with their mother again is payment enough." "How did you know where to find us? I thought you were in the card game." "I was, until Hargrove was called away by a servant. The look on his face told me something was wrong. So I made my excuses and followed. When I heard the commotion in the West Wing, I knew you must have found them." Eliza's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing gently. "We wouldn't have escaped without you." Matthew's fingers curled around hers. "You would have found a way. A mother protecting her children is a force few men can reckon with." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the soft breathing of the sleeping children and the gentle murmur of the stream. "What will you do now?" Matthew finally asked. "When we get back to Wheatland?" Eliza sighed, the question bringing the uncertain future into sharp focus. "I don't know. The ranch is mortgaged to the hilt, Frank saw to that. And there will be talk. A woman alone with 2 children. You won't be alone," Matthew said quietly. "Unless you want to be." Eliza turned to look at him, his face barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the trees. "What are you saying?" Matthew's gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond their small clearing. "I'm saying that in the past week, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've known. Your courage, your determination." He broke off, seeming to struggle for words. "Matthew," Eliza said gently, "look at me." He turned, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I'm saying that if you'll have me," he continued, his voice low and earnest, "I'd like to stay, to help you rebuild, to be there for you and your children, if you'll allow it." Eliza's heart swelled with an emotion she had thought she would never feel again. It wasn't the desperate youthful love she had felt for Frank, but something deeper, more solid, a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. "The children have taken to you already," she said softly, "and I would be honored to have you stay." Matthew's hand tightened around hers, and for a moment Eliza thought he might kiss her. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "We should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be challenging. Hargrove won't give up easily." Eliza nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Wake me for the second watch." "Sleep," Matthew insisted. "You need your strength for the children." Eliza returned to her bedroll, settling beside her sleeping children. Despite the danger still lurking behind them, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Her children were safe, and they were together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, perhaps with Matthew at their side. Dawn broke with a chorus of bird song and the soft nickering of the horses. Eliza woke to find Matthew already up, preparing a cold breakfast from their supplies. "The children still sleep," he said quietly as she joined him. "Best to let them rest a bit longer. We've got a hard ride ahead." "Any sign of pursuit?" Eliza asked, accepting the jerky and hardtack he offered. "Nothing yet, but they'll be coming. Hargrove isn't a man who takes kindly to losing what he considers his property." They ate in companionable silence, watching as the forest came alive with morning light. Finally, Eliza roused the children, who woke disoriented before remembering the events of the previous day. "Mama!" Rebecca cried, throwing her arms around Eliza's neck. "I thought I dreamed you." "No dream, my love," Eliza assured her, kissing her daughter's tousled hair. "I'm here, and we're going home." After a quick breakfast, they saddled the horses, Matthew lifting Rebecca to ride with him while Samuel rode with Eliza. "We'll head south toward Devil's Pass," Matthew decided, "but we'll stay off the main trails. It will take longer, but it's safer." They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat. The children, resilient as only the young can be, seemed to recover their spirits as the miles passed, Rebecca chattering happily to Matthew while Samuel watched the forest around them with solemn attention. It was late afternoon when Matthew suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Listen," he said quietly. Eliza strained her ears, hearing nothing at first, then catching the faint sound of hoofbeats in the distance behind them. "How many?" she asked, her arms tightening around Samuel. "Hard to tell. At least 3, maybe more." Matthew's expression was grim. "They're gaining on us." Eliza looked at her children, then at the rugged terrain ahead. "What do we do?" Matthew scanned the forest, his mind clearly racing through options. "There's a canyon about 2 miles east of here. Narrow entrance, but it widens inside. Good defensive position if it comes to that. And if it doesn't? The canyon leads to a pass that will take us south to the main trail to Devil's Pass. If we can reach it without being seen, we might still outrun them." They changed direction, pushing their tired horses as much as they dared through the increasingly rocky terrain. The sun was setting by the time they reached the canyon entrance, a narrow gap between towering rock walls, barely wide enough for a horse to pass. "Perfect," Matthew murmured as they slipped through. "They'll have to come through one at a time. Makes them easy targets if it comes to shooting." Inside, the canyon opened into a wider space with steep walls rising on all sides. A small stream trickled along one edge, and sparse vegetation clung to the rocky ground. "We'll make camp here," Matthew decided, helping Rebecca down from his horse. "No fire. If they follow our trail, we'll hear them coming through that gap." They settled the children in a sheltered spot between 2 large boulders, Eliza singing softly to Rebecca while Samuel kept watch with a seriousness beyond his years. Matthew checked his pistol, then handed Eliza her father's revolver. "Remember how to use this?" Eliza nodded, the weight of the weapon familiar in her hand. "I pray I won't have to." "As do I," Matthew replied. "But Hargrove's men won't hesitate to shoot, especially now that we've embarrassed him." They took turns keeping watch as night fell, the canyon growing darker as the moon rose behind the high walls. The children slept fitfully, disturbed by unfamiliar sounds and the tension they could sense in the adults. It was just past midnight, during Matthew's watch, when he heard it, the soft clink of metal against stone, the muffled thud of a hoof striking rocky ground. Someone was approaching the canyon entrance. He moved silently to where Eliza slept beside the children, touching her shoulder lightly. She woke instantly, her eyes questioning. "They're here," he whispered, "at least 4 of them moving carefully." Eliza sat up, reaching for her revolver. "What's the plan?" "You stay with the children. I'll position myself near the entrance. If they try to come through, I'll have a clear shot." "And if there are too many of them?" Matthew's expression was resolute. "Then we retreat further into the canyon. There's a path up the back wall, difficult, but passable. It leads to the pass I mentioned." Eliza nodded, her face pale but determined in the moonlight. "Be careful." Matthew touched her cheek briefly, then moved away, disappearing into the shadows near the canyon entrance. The minutes stretched endlessly as Eliza waited. Her children sleeping fitfully beside her, her revolver ready in her hand. She could hear nothing beyond the gentle trickle of the stream and the occasional night bird. Then, the silence was shattered by a gunshot, followed by a man's cry of pain. More shots followed in quick succession, the sounds echoing off the canyon walls. Rebecca woke with a frightened sob, and Samuel sat up, eyes wide with fear. Eliza pulled them close, her heart racing as she strained to see through the darkness. "Mama, what's happening?" Samuel whispered. "Matthew is protecting us," Eliza replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to be very quiet." More gunfire erupted, followed by shouting. Eliza recognized Matthew's voice among them, calling out warnings to the men trying to enter the canyon. "That's far enough," he shouted. "The next man through that gap gets a bullet between the eyes." A different voice answered, cold, commanding, unmistakably Hargrove's. "You're outnumbered, Hayes. Hand over the woman and children, and perhaps I'll let you live." "They don't belong to you, Hargrove," Matthew called back. "The children are with their mother, where they belong. I paid good money for those brats." Hargrove's voice echoed through the canyon. "Zimmerman sold them fair and square." Eliza felt Samuel stiffen beside her at the mention of their surname. "Mama?" he questioned, his young voice trembling. "Did Papa really sell us?" Eliza's throat tightened with grief and rage. How dare Hargrove strip away what little innocence her children had left? "Listen to me," she said fiercely, gathering both children close. "Your father made a terrible mistake. But that doesn't make what Hargrove did right. You belong with me always." A fresh volley of gunfire drowned out any response her children might have made. Eliza tensed, torn between sheltering her children and rushing to help Matthew. The decision was made for her when Matthew appeared suddenly beside them, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, blood seeping from a graze on his arm. "We need to move," he said urgently. "I've slowed them down, but they're working their way around the sides. We need to get to that path before they cut us off." Eliza nodded, gathering Rebecca into her arms while Matthew helped Samuel to his feet. They moved quickly through the darkness, following the canyon wall until they reached a steep, narrow path that wound upward through the rocks. "It's rough going," Matthew warned, "but it's our only chance. I'll go first with Samuel, then you and Rebecca follow." The climb was treacherous, made more difficult by the darkness and the need for silence. Loose stones threatened to give away their position with every step, and the path was barely wide enough for a grown person, let alone someone carrying a child. They were halfway up when a shout from below indicated they had been spotted. Gunfire followed immediately, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. "Keep climbing," Matthew urged, pushing Samuel ahead of him as he turned to fire back at their pursuers. Eliza pressed on, her arms aching with Rebecca's weight, her feet slipping on the loose stones. Above them, the ridge of the canyon wall was visible against the night sky, so close, yet so far. A bullet struck the rock beside her head, showering her with stone fragments. Rebecca whimpered in terror, burying her face in her mother's neck. "Almost there," Eliza gasped, forcing her trembling legs to carry them the final distance. They crested the ridge to find a small plateau, beyond which stretched the pass Matthew had mentioned, a narrow corridor between towering peaks. Samuel waited for them, his small face white with fear in the moonlight. "Where's Matthew?" Eliza asked, setting Rebecca down beside her brother. "Right behind you," Samuel replied, pointing back the way they had come. Eliza turned to see Matthew still on the path, exchanging fire with the men below. As she watched, he fired his last shot, then scrambled up the final stretch to join them on the plateau. "They're still coming," he said grimly, reloading his pistol. "2 are down, but Hargrove and at least 3 others are still on our trail." "We keep moving then," Eliza decided, gathering her children. "Through the pass?" Matthew nodded. "It's our best chance. If we can reach the main trail by dawn, we might find other travelers' safety in numbers." They set off across the plateau and into the pass, moving as quickly as the rough terrain and darkness would allow. The children were exhausted but kept pace, driven by fear and the determination not to slow their escape. Dawn found them emerging from the pass onto a forested slope that led down toward the main trail. They paused briefly, scanning the path behind them for any sign of pursuit. "I think we've lost them," Matthew said cautiously. "For now, at least. They'll have to circle around to reach the trail. The pass is too difficult for horses." Eliza nodded, too exhausted for words. The children leaned against her, their small faces drawn with fatigue. "Let's rest for an hour," Matthew suggested, leading them to a sheltered spot beneath a stand of pines. "Then we'll make our way down to the trail. With luck, we can reach Devil's Pass by nightfall." They rested, sharing the last of their food and water. The children fell asleep almost immediately, curled together like puppies. Eliza turned to Matthew, noticing for the first time the blood that had dried on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. "It's nothing," he assured her, "just a graze." She insisted on examining the wound anyway, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind it after cleaning it as best she could with water from their canteen. "Thank you," Matthew said quietly as she worked, "not just for this, but for trusting me, for allowing me to help." Eliza met his gaze, her heart full of emotions she couldn't begin to name. "I should be thanking you. Without you, my children would still be in that monster's hands." "Perhaps we can agree that no thanks are necessary between us," Matthew suggested, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. Eliza nodded, a small smile touching her lips despite their desperate situation. "Agreed." They reached Devil's Pass that evening, the small town a welcome sight after their harrowing journey. The townsfolk, already buzzing with rumors of the confrontation at Hargrove's ranch, greeted them with a mixture of awe and wariness. "You folks best keep moving," the livery stable owner advised as Matthew arranged for fresh horses. "Hargrove's got friends in these parts. Word is he's offering a reward for information on your whereabouts." "We'll leave it first light," Matthew assured him, exchanging a meaningful glance with Eliza. They spent an uneasy night at the saloon, Matthew insisting on taking the room directly adjoining Eliza's, with a door connecting them in case of trouble. The children, despite their exhaustion, resisted sleep, afraid that Hargrove's men might find them in the night. "No one will take you again," Eliza promised as she tucked them into the narrow bed. "Matthew and I won't let that happen." "Is he going to be our new papa?" Rebecca asked suddenly, her innocent question catching Eliza off guard. We haven't discussed that, sweetheart," Eliza replied carefully. "I think he should be," Samuel declared with the certainty of childhood. "He saved us, and he makes you smile again." Eliza kissed her son's forehead, marveling at his perception. "Let's focus on getting home safely first, shall we?" They left Devil's Pass before dawn the next morning, riding hard for Wheatland. The journey was tense but uneventful, each mile putting more distance between them and Hargrove's influence. As they rode, Eliza found herself watching Matthew with the children, his patience with Rebecca's endless questions, his quiet respect for Samuel's serious nature. He treated them not as burdens or possessions, but as people worthy of dignity and care. It was 4 days later, as the familiar outline of Wheatland appeared on the horizon, that Matthew finally broached the subject of their future. "You know, Hargrove might still come looking," he said as they rode side by side, the children dozing in their saddles ahead of them. "Men like him don't forgive easily." "I know," Eliza replied, her expression resolute, "but we'll be ready if he does." "Eliza," Matthew began, then hesitated. "What I said in the canyon about staying, about helping you rebuild, I meant it. But I understand if you need time to consider. You've been through a great deal." Eliza studied him, this man who had risked everything for her and her children. In the past 2 weeks, she had seen his courage, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. She had also seen the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, with a depth of feeling that both thrilled and terrified her. "The children adore you," she said softly. "And I would be lying if I said I felt nothing for you." Hope flickered in Matthew's eyes. But we've known each other such a short time, and under the most extraordinary circumstances. I fear that once we return to normal life, you might regret your offer." Matthew guided his horse closer to hers, reaching out to take her hand. "Eliza Zimmerman, I have spent my entire adult life running from connections, from putting down roots, yet from the moment I saw you on that porch, letter in hand, I felt something I've never experienced before, a desire to stay, to be part of something meaningful." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. Even knowing the challenges we'll face, a mortgaged ranch, 2 children who've been traumatized, a woman whose husband sold their children and abandoned them? "Especially knowing those things," Matthew replied firmly. "You are the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known. Your children are resilient and brave. Together, I believe we can build something worthwhile." Eliza squeezed his hand, her heart lighter than it had been in years, despite the trials they had endured. "Then yes, Matthew Hayes. Yes to staying, yes to rebuilding, yes to facing whatever comes next together." The smile that spread across Matthew's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that held the promise of many more to come. They rode into Wheatland that afternoon, a family forged through adversity and bound by love rather than blood. News of their arrival spread quickly through the small community, and by evening, neighbors had gathered at the Zimmerman ranch, bringing food and offers of help to welcome them home. "The community stands with you, Eliza," Mrs. Carson declared, her husband nodding agreement beside her. "What Frank did was unconscionable, but you and these precious children are part of Wheatland, and we take care of our own." Over the following weeks, with the help of neighbors and Matthew's steady presence, the ranch began to show signs of recovery. The mortgage was renegotiated, with Matthew investing his savings as a partner in the property. New livestock was purchased, fields were prepared for planting, and the house was repaired and freshened with paint. The children, too, began to heal. There were nightmares, questions about their father that Eliza struggled to answer honestly while preserving what she could of their innocence. But there was also laughter again, the sound of small feet running through the house, the gradual return of childhood joy. Matthew proved himself a natural with the children, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught Samuel to ride, to care for the animals, to take pride in honest work. With Rebecca, he was gentler, reading to her in the evenings, carving small wooden toys for her, always ready with a smile or a word of encouragement. And with Eliza, he was a partner in the truest sense, sharing the work, the worries, the rare moments of peace at the end of long days. Their relationship deepened with each passing week, building on the foundation of respect and shared purpose that had brought them together. 3 months after their return to Wheatland, on a warm summer evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard, Matthew took Eliza's hand and asked her to be his wife. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, his usual confidence giving way to vulnerability. "But I love you, Eliza. I love Samuel and Rebecca as if they were my own. I want to make this family official, if you'll have me." Eliza's answer was a kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. The wedding was held 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the town church, followed by a celebration at the ranch. The entire community turned out to witness their union, to celebrate this family that had endured so much and emerged stronger. "Are we Hayes now, Mama?" Rebecca asked as they shared their first meal as an official family that evening. "You are, if you want to be," Matthew answered before Eliza could speak. "But Zimmerman is a fine name, too. The choice is yours." Samuel considered this seriously, then declared, "I want to be Samuel Hayes. It sounds like a name a man could be proud of." "Me too," Rebecca chimed in. "I want to be Rebecca Hayes." Matthew's eyes met Eliza's over the children's heads, both of them moved by this simple acceptance, this embrace of their new family identity. That night, After the children were asleep, Eliza stood in Matthew's arms on the porch, looking out at the land that had nearly been lost to them. Stars scattered across the Wyoming sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wild grass. "Are you happy, Mrs. Hayes?" Matthew murmured against her hair. Eliza turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had ridden for days to bring her children home, who had fought to protect them, who had chosen to stay when he could have continued his solitary journey. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, her heart full. "You gave us back more than just Samuel and Rebecca, Matthew. You gave us hope, a future." "You had those things already," he countered, tracing her cheek with gentle fingers. "They were just buried for a time." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm grateful beyond words that you helped us uncover them again." Their life together was not without challenges. 6 months after their wedding, word came that Frank Zimmerman had been killed in a saloon brawl in California, leaving Eliza with complicated feelings to work through and difficult explanations for the children. A year after their return to Wheatland, Hargrove made one final attempt to reclaim what he considered his property, sending men to threaten the family. But this time, they were prepared. Matthew, Eliza, and several neighbors stood together, making it clear that the Hayes family was protected by the entire community. Hargrove's men retreated, and no further threats materialized. As the seasons passed, the ranch prospered under their combined care. The mortgage was eventually paid off, new buildings were added, and their herd grew. Samuel showed a talent for working with horses, while Rebecca's quick mind and love of learning suggested a future teaching in the school that was being built in town. 2 years after their wedding, Eliza gave birth to twin boys, James and William Hayes, adding joyful chaos to their already full home. Matthew proved himself as devoted a father to his biological sons as he was to Samuel and Rebecca, showing no difference in his love or expectations for any of the children. On the twins' first birthday, as the family celebrated with a picnic beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, Eliza found herself watching Matthew as he played with all 4 children. Samuel, now 11, was helping the toddlers stand on wobbling legs, while Rebecca, 9, crowned everyone with wreaths of wildflowers she had woven. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Hayes," Matthew said, joining her on the blanket after the children ran off to explore the creek bank. "I was just thinking how different our lives might have been," Eliza replied, leaning against his shoulder. "If you hadn't ridden up that day, if you hadn't offered to help us." Matthew's arms circled her waist, drawing her closer. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are simply meant to be." Eliza smiled, remembering the desperate woman she had been, standing on her porch with a crumpled letter and a shattered heart. "I never thought I would say this, but I'm almost grateful for what Frank did." Matthew raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Grateful?" "Not for the pain he caused the children," Eliza clarified. "Never that. But if he hadn't left, if he hadn't forced me to fight for my children, I might never have discovered my own strength, and I certainly wouldn't have found you." Matthew pressed a kiss to her temple. "You always had that strength, Eliza. I just had the privilege of witnessing it." Together they watched their children, the 2 who had been rescued from a fate too terrible to contemplate, and the 2 who had been born into a home filled with love and security. 4 children who would grow up knowing their worth, knowing they were treasured, knowing they belonged. "I love you, Matthew Hayes," Eliza said softly, turning to meet his gaze, "for the man you were when you rode to our rescue, and for the man you are every day since." "And I love you, Eliza Hayes," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for your courage, your heart, and for making me the richest man in Wyoming, not in gold, but in everything that truly matters." As the sun began to set over the rolling plains of their home, casting long shadows across the land they had fought so hard to keep, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that they had not merely survived their ordeal, they had triumphed over it. The road had been long and fraught with danger, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Together, a family bound by choice rather than obligation, by love rather than blood. And in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all.